This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful study that I've wanted to do for a long time. And it's something you can use for the rest of your life. This particular study, it's just a tasting of what's available in the Old Testament. It's going to deal with the theme, does God really have the power? Will he show up when you need him? And what is he willing to do? Does he really need your help to accomplish his purpose? And we've talked about how, yes, we cooperate with, don't read it yet. Don't read it yet. I'll read it. We're going to read it together. So focus on this idea. We're going to look at a number of passages that deal with when God shows up. You see, we cooperate with him in ways that he tells us. But the idea is that he is in complete control. Now, this was a big problem back in the days of developing Israel, is because they always felt it was up to them. Everything is about us. We have to do it on our own, and God just provides in between. And God spends the entire Old Testament trying to switch this concept that no, I am in control. I have all the power that you could ever imagine, and I'm going to prove it to you. So I'm going to read with you a number of my favorite stories there are so many, but I'm going to tell you some main passages that you can use when you're praying with people. The biggest problem you're going to uncover is that they really don't believe that God can heal. Remember, we talked about it so many times. Well, God can heal colds and sore throats, but can he really heal this brain tumor? Can he really heal this back problem that I've had my whole life? Can he really do it? And as crazy as that sounds, the God who created you out of nothing, can he fix you? Well, we need stories to tell people, to explain to them, yes, he can. That's why I love the Old Testament, because it's filled with stories. These are stories, they're true stories, because you could never make this stuff up. They would never have imagined the possibility of making up some of these stories. It's all about, if you know these stories, you can say, let me show you a passage. Let me tell you a story about when God showed up, and all they had to do was sit still. And you said, really? Be patient and wait. So does that appear in the Old Testament? You're going to be amazed how many times it appears God said, just be quiet. Just sit there and watch what I do. All you have to do is believe. If you would believe, now it's based on a story. See, God performed an amazing, amazing story to start this belief going. Because you don't believe because someone said, you got to believe, brother. You got to believe, sister. Remember that from last time. Even God said, I'm going to give you reason you can believe in me forever. As long as you are Israel, you can always go back to this story. It's the greatest story you will ever hear, and it will reach its way all the way to Canaan. It will reach its way all the way around the world, and they will know what God pulled off in Egypt. He did tenfold to prove how powerful he was. Now, this is all about the deliverance of the slaves from Egypt, right? You hear it 1,000,006 times about how he refers back to when you delivered us from the hand of the Egyptians, when you delivered us from slavery, when you rescued us. So everything refers back to this story. Well, I'm going to unpack this story for you in a way that you never heard before. That is to enlighten you about what's really happening at the Red Sea. We're not going to look at all the plagues. We're going to look at the greatest miracle when they began to believe and put their trust in the Lord. This is the greatest story in the Bible because it was the beginning of their belief. You see, and it goes on from this point, he tells all the stories. And the word that they use for God in Hebrew is a word that means it's a person, if he doesn't show up, there is imminent disaster. There's a word in Hebrew that you won't remember, so I won't even tell you, but it means if this person doesn't show up, you are going to die. You are going to lose. It is inevitable. You are going to lose. And each time this story is told, it's about when it says God in Hebrew, it's this word. And it sets you up like, if he didn't show up, this would have ended real bad. But it ends in victory because he shows up. And so let's begin. I'm going to tell you that when the Bible was written, there are different traditions. I'm sure you're all aware of this. When you read, as it's coming down through oral traditions, there are probably four different traditions that tell stories orally. Each one tells the story a little differently. And so later on, the Bible compilers, they don't leave out a story. Open up, if you look at Genesis, what do you notice from the very beginning? You see two completely different accounts of the creation, right? Did it ever, you ever wonder why? It doesn't trouble us because they don't contradict each other, but they're different perspectives of the creation. So looking at those two accounts, one is called the Yahwist and one is the priestly tradition. Well, I mean, the Yahwist was one that was very down to earth. They experienced God in a very real, wonderful, practical way. Remember, like no other nations had ever experienced them. God became real. He comes down to earth. He plays in the dirt and he forms man out of mud. That God came down from the heavens. And it's a whole different picture of God. It's called the Yahwist tradition. God is Yahweh. He is this wonderful God who relates with his people on a personal level. The other tradition in Exodus, in Genesis, is the priestly account, which is it's a more spiritual account. It's more theological. It gives a different impression of who God is, that he is so awesome and so wonderful and so powerful, right? And so we'll always try to focus on these elements. So the priestly is more spiritual, maybe more liturgical, more theological. But you put two together, and you have what? I have a more well-balanced understanding of who God is. He isn't all one, and he's not all the other, right? You may say, I have a problem with this church because all they focus on is maybe the liturgy and the high supremacy of God. But this one, God is so personal. He's your buddy, he's your pal. And it seems like each one is something missing. Well, what about if you put those together? You will have a much richer understanding, much richer experience of who God is. And so I can tell you, you'll say, well, these two stories, do they contradict each other? They're very different. But the Bible compiler says, we're not leaving this out. They don't even care that it's telling two stories. What is the point of the story? Because this whole story of Exodus is about who is God. Should we believe in him or should we not? Should we stay in Egypt and worship these gods? They provide food and our clothing and shelter and, right, we're good here. Should we just stick with them or should we switch over to this God who is supposedly our God and this God of the universe? Big new concept. What should we do? Well, they say there's no way we're going to leave out these two, pick one tradition over the other. They're both equally important. So something very, very significant happens at the Red Sea. You've all been taught what? How did the Israelites cross over? What happened? This, right? The sea parted, right? And they walked through. So now we can say, well, you don't believe the Bible, Gary. Well, the fact is, I believe it more than anyone on the planet. But I understand that that God works in and through culture. He works in and through nature. This act of dividing the Red Sea like this has never happened in the history of the world. It never has to this date. What Joshua did, remember when Joshua crosses over the Jordan and the priest's feet touch the water, and what happens? That water in flood stage, that water backs up and stops, right? Well, guess what? That really is a natural occurrence. And that has happened twice since then. So God, but what made that a miracle? At that second, try to now. I think maybe it's happened once more. In thousands of years, it happens once more. The fact, what are the odds? You can have a mathematician figure that out. What are the odds when the priests walk down to a flooding river, the second they touch the river, it backs up? That's the miracle, right? That's the miracle. Something happened at the Red Sea that was more amazing than if the sea divided like this, right? I'm not diminishing, I'm adding to. So I'm just preparing you. Two completely different stories are woven together. And as you read, I highlight it so you will see, as I pull this apart, you'll see that makes sense. Well, the words are different. In the Hebrew, there are two different languages that they can, a scholar could pull this apart and say, this tradition is one, this is another, and they wove them together. But they still have the original kind of language or terminology that they would use. And so let's read, and there's a reason why I'm doing this, because it tells something huge about God and what are they supposed to do when God shows up? And it's very, very exciting. And this theme carries through the Bible. And it's going to carry through into your life. And you can tell this story for the rest of your life. So let's look at the story that you know. I'm going to read it to you in the black. This will be the priestly account. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Phil-Haroth between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So the Israelites did this. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites, who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen, and the troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they encamped by the sea near Phil-Haroth, opposite Baal-Zephon. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. You're seeing what is the purpose of this great miracle that's about to take place. It's all about giving glory to God. Who's got the power? Remember the contest? Yeah, is this God have the power, or does Pharaoh, the gods of Egypt, have the power? Who has the power? Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. But the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. Did you get the full story from that? Isn't that a complete story? Perfectly intact, right? So you would say, well, what's all this other stuff in between? How come it's saying different things? But this is exactly verse for verse. All I did was highlight. It's like every other section tells a different story. But you'll see this one tells a perfectly accurate story the way you were taught. And you'll say, well, what's the rest of this story? Right? So there's the other story explains about they never moved. God said, just sit there and be still. I will take care of this. I've got this completely covered. I'm going to show you my power in a natural way, and you will see if you have the eyes to believe. You see, whenever God provides a miracle, remember this principle for the rest of your life. Whenever you see a miracle, there will always be someone who will say, well, it could have been this, it could have been that. And you will have to wrestle with that. But you will never see something that is so, even though I said, I can't believe you could discredit that. People will try. So, but in the overall picture, the miracle is there is always some room for doubt. Otherwise, you wouldn't need what? Faith. You wouldn't need it. If I made everything so obvious, you wouldn't need faith. It would just stay the same. It's like, oh yeah, it would be so nonchalant. It wouldn't grow. You wouldn't be searching to find God behind the scenes if everything was so obvious. Your faith would dwindle into nothing because you wouldn't need any. You see? It's when I'm searching to build it that it grows stronger and stronger. I'm looking for ways now for God to work in my life. Kathy is looking for ways that he will send her someone to witness to, right? If they just happen automatically, she didn't have to look, it would like lose all the challenge. It's just going to happen anyway. It's not my doing. I had nothing to do with it. It's just, and God did the whole thing. But the fact that I'm searching for God working in my life excites me and deepens my belief. It deepens my faith that he is really present. He's really alive. So I want you to hear the story and see if you can figure out what's happening, because it's very, very real. And this has happened. This event has happened a number of times in the history of the Red Sea. So they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. See the problem? Should we stay or should we go now? Right? Should we stay or should we go with this new one? You want to sing it to us? This is the question that's set up by this the narrative writer. He's setting it up. This is the problem. Should we stay or should we follow this God who has already given us signs, but we really don't know because now we're about to be slaughtered. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still." After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. By the day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. What's the message he's trying to give? He is in front of them. He's leading them, but he's right with them. I've got my eyes on you. You can see me, and I can see you. We are together. I am right here. If you start to get worried, I'm right in the next room. The light's on. You can come in. You can see mom and dad are right here. We're right here, right? Don't you say that to your children? You do not have to be afraid. I'm right here. Mommy's right here. God is saying, look up. You'll see the smoke. You'll see the fire, the light. I am with you. That's the theme of this story. The other story, who is more powerful? This one, am I with you or am I not? And if I'm with you, what am I able to do? When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. As Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them, and they were terrified. Right? Then the next part. Then they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." There is the problem. Should we stay or should we, why should we, they say, why should we trust you? We were okay there. We were living, at least we're alive. It was a big deal to be alive back then. If you could survive that, that heat and that climate and that slavery, it was a big deal. We're still alive, right? And now we see an army with almost matching soldiers in chariots against us. We have no weapons, and we're almost one-on-one with trained soldiers, the best soldiers in the world. Our chances for survival are zero. And we're going to be slaughtered. Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still." What did God reveal to Moses that he could make this powerful statement? What did God reveal to him? I'm going to take care of this. I got this. Moses, you just tell them, I've got this. What is the message I want you to tell the person you're praying for who is in really bad shape. They're in pain, they're suffering, their finances are down the drain. Whatever the situation, what are you going to tell that person with belief, this confident? My goal standing here is to bring you to such a place of belief you can boldly proclaim, as Moses did, and you will be speaking the truth. And you can say, "Thus saith the Lord." Why can you say that? Because this book is filled with stories that back me up. Now I have a life of stories that I can tell you that will even be more powerful than these cool ones in the Bible. They will be way cooler because they're mine. And that's what you will speak with such boldness and such confidence because it's true. And God, now you think that if you say, now you can't force God just because you said it, but if you really believe and you're standing up for God, right? It's like we feel there's only 10 of us left on the planet who's willing to do this. And I step up and I say to you, God has the power to heal you. He wants you to be well. God's going to say, "Oh, I wish you never said that because it's my day off." Right? Chances are zero that he will do that. He will say, finally, I got something to respond to. Thank you. Thank you. I am ready. I have been waiting and waiting for Kathy to talk to that woman. Now watch how fast I step in, right? Watch how fast he responds, right? I've been waiting for you to talk to someone. I've been waiting for you to speak about me. You will have a story to tell. And so Moses was told by God, as you will be told at that moment, I got this. We have got this. Now, Moses was a big player here, like you are a big player. How did the message get, the most difficult part, how did the message get from God to these people? Moses, what's your main job? I didn't tell you that you're going to sit home on the couch and this God is going to heal this person. He can't do it without you. He said, you need to go talk to these people and convince them I have the power. I want to heal them. I want to do this. I live for this. But I can't do it unless you tell them. Moses, he was just hit by a lightning bolt and says, believe me when I tell you, I'm going to make a statement. God has got this, and you're just going to sit still. And they say, shouldn't we run? And Moses says, just stay still. You see, in one passage, it looks like they're running. But it was brought out, they don't care about that because they want to talk about the power of God to divide this water. If it's about his power, then we don't worry about that they're actually running away. And God said, it really is going to be even greater than that. You don't even have to move. You don't have to run from anything because I've got you protected. I've got you covered. In fact, I'm going to heal you right here. You don't have to go running off to that place where you're going to get healed. I'll fix you right here, right now, right? Stay put. I will heal you right here. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. You have to do something. This is actually just be still and be what? The most difficult thing in the world, to be patient and wait. The most difficult thing your client will ever do is be patient and wait on the Lord. Then the angel of God, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, so where was God the whole time? Right in front of them, withdrew and went behind them. Why? Because that's where the protection is needed. There's no army up in front now. You don't need to be led. We're here where we're supposed to be. Very, very important. So God is up front leading them, right? And so it's like, well, we got to get away from these Egyptians. Well, if that was true, then why did I move around here? I'm not leading, I'm coming around here. Between you and the Egyptians, I am protecting you from the Egyptians. We're not going anywhere. We're not running because I'm here to protect you. I've got this. You just sit still and watch this. It's like, buckle up And watch this, all right? The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other side, so neither went near the other all night long. God needed them separated because he had something he was planning, something that was happening that only happens during the night. And all that night, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. What does that mean? The Israelites are camped here. The Red Sea is over here. The Egyptians are here. There's a strange occurrence. The wind always blows from the west. It blows towards the shore. Always, you can go there right now, and that's the way the wind blows. Always, always. I was there. It always blows. As go to the Gulf, you'll find the wind is coming off of the water, right? It's the way the currents flow. On this particular night, and here's the miracle, the wind shifts and it's going against the water. It's going east. And what is it doing to that water that's used to be blowing this way? It pushes the water out. It literally pushes the water and drives it back. It drives the waves back. It drives the tide back. And this becomes muck, right? Imagine this water, it's never been this way before, but it drives it back. And now, I don't know how far it's back, but it has happened since then. This phenomena has happened maybe once or twice before, after, right? So now, setting up a scene, we have this huge area of pitch blackness, and it's all muck. The wind has driven it out, okay? So all that night, he drove the sea back. Then he tells us, during the last watch of the night, which I believe is around 4 in the morning, right? During because the last watch would go like from 4 to 6 till daybreak, and then you'd switch again. So during the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He jammed the wheels of their chariots so that they had difficulty driving. And the Egyptians said, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." And at daybreak, the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it. The Lord swept them into the sea. Not one of them survived. What happens is, and I'm going to read you several more stories where God does this amazing thing. Now imagine you're in a camp. You're in this giant camp, and you know that you're in the morning. You're going up against a very powerful God. They have already witnessed 10 plagues, and they're knowing this God. Is it smart that we're out here? I mean, weren't we happy? We guys, go, would you? And they gave him gifts and said, go, get out of here. Weren't we happy that they left and they took that God with them that ravished our land? They would have known this. The land is destroyed, right? Their firstborn children are dead. This is the power of this God has brought tragedy on our land. Let him go, get these people out of here. I said, smart that we're out. Now you're in the middle of a camp. It's pitch black. And God instills panic into them. It could have been people talking. It begins with worry. It just turns into fear, which turns into panic. And they hear a noise. And what could you do? you begin to get frightened, and people respond with noise, and they even, I'm going to tell you the next story, they even begin to attack one another. It's absolutely, but it's, you can, if you imagine yourself in that situation, you can see, I could see how that could happen. This is in blackness. Fear is you're already very much concerned about this battle. And all of a sudden, God instills panic into them. And what do? They jump in their chariots and they take off. And they just flee. And they are racing with their chariots, and they go right into the sea. They, in pitch blackness, you don't know where you're going. And if I'm going away from them, they just thought, for some reason, they thought this was the way to go, and they just drove headlong into this muck. And it says it clogged their chariot wheels, right? And now imagine this vast army is out stuck in this quicksand, in this muck. And then what's the miracle that happens? What does God do next? He changes the wind and it flows back. Just by coincidence, you see, it flows back. He waits for them and they lunge into this muck. They're out there and the waters come back. Now, one of them survives. Now, this is when it all begins. This is the greatest passage in the Bible. This is when it all began, right here. That day, the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and Moses his servant. Greatest line in the Bible. This is where it begins. That's when they get it. In the New Testament, we see when Jesus appears to them after the resurrection, after all that he did, they finally get it. Well, this is where it begins in the Old Testament. This is even after witnessing 10 amazing, powerful afflictions, they still do not understand. This is the moment. Why? This is the greatest. They never moved. The reality is they never moved because it says when they got up and they walked down, all the Egyptians, and what do you think they said? What just happened? We never raised a sword. We didn't run. We never even knew what was happening. While we were sleeping, God did all this. He took care of it all. And when we wake up, we said, oh my gosh, it's done. It has been accomplished. And all we did was obey Moses when he said, just be patient and trust in God, and he will deliver you. That is a mighty work that you have to do. You have to really believe in the most ridiculous of situations. Yes, I'm telling you to trust God. And they're going to look at you like you have 3 heads. And you say, I know it sounds completely impossible. I know they said he's only got a week to live. I know he's only got an hour to live. In the midst of this ridiculous odds, you're going to tell them, we, Moses and you and me, we are going to trust God. And you say, how do you know that? You say, well, let me tell you a story. And there are many more stories. And then I'm going to tell you a story about me when God showed up in this ridiculous situation. When he showed up. When I was praying for that man, I told this story, I was praying for that man in the hospital who they gave no hope of survival. And I heard a word from God, I've got this. All you have to do, you get him to confess, and we will snatch him back out of the enemy's hands. And I've got this. I will totally heal him right now. And so I said, I'm on it. He's sleeping anyway. And so we did it. But I felt such a communication, and these words came to me so strong. I knew exactly what we needed to confess. And he and I had that come to Jesus moment that I told you about, and he repented. And the next morning, the doctors said, "What happened last night?" They were blown away. What normally takes, if you could possibly recover, it would take weeks, remember, of gradual healing, recovery. The next morning, they took it out. He went home that afternoon. This doesn't happen, but God showed up. But I had to do something. I had to get him to believe. I said, you will recover. I'm talking to him. I said, you will recover. You need to confess. And then God's got the rest. He will overcome this sickness, but you have to believe. You have to trust that God's got this. Does this do something for you, realizing this is amazing? There are two stories here, and they're both equally powerful. They are both significant. This one tells you an amazing story of God's ability to show up and to do the whole job, but you have a work to do. You have to trust. Probably the most difficult thing on the planet. You do have to believe, you have to trust that his words are true, that if you follow this, he will come through. This is the reason why I showed you this way, is to show you the most powerful message of how God will do everything he needs to do to bring healing to the situation. I want to tell you several stories. 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 24. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. What does it mean to lay siege? You surround the city. You surround it so that no one can come out. And really what you want to do is you want to starve them out. So he is laying siege to Jerusalem. These are the Arameans. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. That's a lot of money. That's like, I'll give you $1,000 for that carrot. You know, that's about the level of starvation that's taking place. Let's skip down to this things that it shows you how bad the famine is. But the king is upset. If you look at in verse 30, when the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked, and they saw that under his robes he had sackcloth on his body. He said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today." Elisha predicted that if you do not turn from your pagan ways of worshiping these idols, God is going to bring judgment on Jerusalem. Right? He says it over and over. So what do they do? So the famine occurs, and they blame Elisha. If you hadn't said it, it never would have happened. You see how take no responsibility. He says, what are you talking about? I warned you, now it's my fault. So even the king himself is saying, this is all your fault. We got to blame this on somebody. You're the problem. You're the one talking about it. You brought it about by you talking about it. And you may even be criticized for that in your life. I bet you each of you could tell me a story about, I warned so-and-so about that. I warned my son, I warned my daughter, I warned my brother, and then it happened, and then they said, it's because of you. It's because of you, right? So, Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king sent a messenger ahead, but before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him?" While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. So the king was right behind him. He says, go tell Elijah that I'm going to cut off his head. But he comes right behind to make sure this happens, right? So Elisha knew that this was happening. The king said, "This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" What he's saying is, God's the problem. God's the problem. God brought this around. He doesn't finish the sentence. Elijah said, God is bringing you this famine and this siege because you disobeyed. And he's saying, no, God is just a mean God, like all the other gods we would have known about. He's just punishing us. We're just not good enough, or he's having a slow day, whatever it is, but he wants to harm us. This is from the Lord. Why should I cry out to him? Now watch this. You're gonna experience this every day. I know I do. Why should I cry out to him? He's the one who brought this sickness. I spend most of my time correcting people's false theology. And I say, no, God didn't bring. God is a God of the living. He's not a God of sickness and of death. All I see Jesus doing is healing. That's all he does. Read it. Read it. He's either coming from a miracle, he's either healing someone, or he's on his way to a healing. I never saw one place where he inflicted sickness on anybody. But that's the statement people say. Why should I pray to God for healing? He's the one who brought this on. He must want, it must be his will. You see, he must have brought it. That's a demonic concept. The enemy wants us to think that God is like all the other gods. Like the other gods would bring, they believed, problems, famine, suffering on them because he was an angry, mean God and we didn't appease him. And and the enemy's goal is to get us to believe that our God is just like all the other pagan gods, where absolutely we know it's completely different. Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." All of a sudden, there's a huge market crash, and now things are back to normal. What I was ready to pay $1,000 for today, tomorrow will be back to $1. It'll be right back, and they're saying, what? In one day, the economy is going to stabilize, and there will be, first of all, there's no food to eat, there's no food to buy. What are you talking about? The situation is what? Hopeless. Again, we find ourselves in a situation that is completely irreconcilable. It's completely hopeless. There is no chance of survival. We're surrounded by the most powerful army in the world. We can't go out. We cannot survive. They're going to destroy us. And if they wait long enough, we're all dead from starvation. The situation, we are out of food. We are out of water. The situation is hopeless. When does God show up the best? When the situation is hopeless. I'm telling you, you are going in nowadays it's getting more, people are in more and more hopeless situations. Your ministry is becoming more and more significant. If you don't have some stories to back up God's ability to show up when the situation is hopeless, you're not going to have a leg to stand on. You're going to need stories from the Bible. You're going to need your own stories. You need backup to prove. That's why I love these stories. The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heavens, could this happen? So he is trying to discourage the people by saying, this is what you're speaking about is nonsense. It absolutely cannot happen. You see, he's saying, open up the floodgates of heaven, meaning that even if this grain was stored above the heavens, and you open up the floodgates, as they did at the time of Noah's flood, and all that ocean came down, if that kind of grain came down, it's still, we couldn't make it. We couldn't survive. The situation is beyond even a miracle like that. So he is immediately discouraging the people. And Elisha says, God is going to put you to death because you are spreading disbelief. We are at a point we need to bring belief to these people. You're going down because you are working for the enemy. That's why Jesus says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. I'm trying to get these clowns to step up to believe in me, and you're discouraging them. Get behind me. I don't need you. You're working against me. That's why you'll see when you're praying for someone and there's a disbeliever, get them out of the room. You'll see it in the Bible. It says, get them out of the room. Get all those wailing women out of here, get them out, because they're going to just put an atmosphere of doubt and fear into the room. We want only believers in this room. Don't take someone with you to pray for someone who is on the fence, who's hesitant about, do I really believe? You better bring someone who's got the same belief you do if you want God to show up. Now there was 4 men. You say, how in the world is God going to pull this off? Well, this is where it gets exciting. In your wildest imagination, you can't come up with it. You will not be able to come up with it, and that's what makes this. And guess what? The enemy never saw this coming either. And that's why it's never going to be the way you imagine, because if it is, then it may be a good way. You've heard me say this. You may have a great idea how God is going to show up and save the day. In fact, you have 3 good ways that God could do it and show up. So you're thinking these amazing ideas and you're giving God suggestions. But it never happens the way that you think. Why? You ever wonder that? There's also a very interesting concept that God gave me this idea one day when I was trying to explain this to someone, because it came out of nowhere. When things come out of nowhere, I know it's from God. Someone was complaining to me, how come it's never the way I think? I give him great ideas. Is it because he just has to prove he's a big shot? Right? And he's going to do it. He's going to outsmart me. It's like, I don't need you. You're just a little low on peon, as like the way the other gods see their people, right? You're nothing. You're just dirt. You're just mud people. Don't bother me. I don't need your suggestions. And they think that's what it must be, right? Otherwise, I'm giving him really good ideas. Why is it never the way I think of it? And it came to me out of nowhere. I never thought of this. Because while you're thinking of it, who else is reading your thoughts? The enemy. And while you're thinking this, he's saying, boys, 3 of you go out. There's 3. She just gave 3 good ideas, and any one will work. Take 3 of your best men and go squash those possibilities. Squash them right now. And they set to work, and they can do exactly that. They will find ways to destroy your plan. And so God has to come up. He has to wait until the last minute. I always wonder why. Why is it always the last day of the month when the funds would come in for me to pay these suppliers? Why is it when I was going through a really rough time, it came in some mysterious way the last day, moments before it was due? And this is when I figured out why. Because if the enemy knew what God was planning, he would have crushed it. He would have found a way. And because I gave God all kinds of suggestions, right, of how it could happen. And so the way this happened was the day before, this woman was challenging me on why does God never do it my way? I was working with this woman who was a realtor, and she was really in difficult straits. Their family had really no money. Her husband didn't have his, had lost his job, and she, as a realtor, was doing very, very little work. And she said, I have 3 jobs, 3 closings that I'm going to do on this date. And she had been preparing for 2 months that she was going to have these closings. She said, and then I'll actually be able to pay you, right? And so I'm months and months. He said, but I have these 3 closings, and it's all going to happen on this day, and I'm going to make around $6,000, and it's going to help. We can help just get us a little bit back more on our feet. And I said, great, right? We're praying that this will happen. At 12 o'clock, I get a message. She said, you're never going to believe this. She said, all 3 of the fell through. And the stupidest, I can't even make this stuff up. The reasons why they fell through are so ridiculous. The strangest things happened that they fell through. All 3 fell through. And I said, well, I'm not accepting this, because we have been promised God's blessing on this day. We really felt it was leading to, you are going to be blessed. I've got this, rest in it, trust in me. You are going to be able to make a payment on this day. And she was really believing this message from God. You will be back in shape on this day. Exactly like Elisha said, tomorrow at this time, you are going to have all the grain and wine that you need, and you can buy it at the gate. It'll be available. Out of nowhere, it'll be available. The same exact kind of message. But it's 12 o'clock, and all the deals fell through. I said, let's pray. So we just committed together. I said, I got to respond. So I stopped what I was doing. I called her back and said, we got to pray. And we just said, God, we're just trusting in you. We reconfirmed our belief. We didn't give up. We didn't say, like the king said, oh, why even bother? He's the one who ruined these jobs. He must be angry at me. He's the one who canceled all the jobs. And guess what happens? God said, oh, great, nice. Now my hands are completely tied, right? But we didn't do that. We said, Lord, you told us a promise, and we are sticking to it. We are believing in your promise. Do whatever you want, but we believe in your promise. Amen. 2 hours later, she calls me. She says, are you ready for this? Right? She said, my head is spinning. She said, after we hung up, moments later, I get a phone call. And it's from a friend that she hasn't talked to in years in Canada. The woman says, I'm working on this deal in Florida, but I'm stuck in Canada. This was during the COVID last year. I can't get out of here. Would you close this deal? It has to be closed today. And if you close this for me, you'll earn $12,000. See, that's what I try to teach. God doesn't just match it. God doesn't restore what the locusts have eaten. That's, anybody could do that. He has to grind Satan's nose in the dirt and said, watch this. You stole from my girl, watch this. And he gives double of what she was going to make. And all she had to do was what? Trust. What did the Israelites have to do? She had to trust. Now, what's fascinating, I had taught her that story. And so it added something to, when it's her turn to believe, she's got some backup. She's got a story that she can fall back on. And it strengthened her belief. Now she's got a real live story about how God shows up in impossible situations. And I'm sure that will be one of many, many stories when God shows up. So let's see what happens. Now there were 4 men with the leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say, 'We'll go into the city,' the famine is there and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die." Right? What's the difference? At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, now this is the most powerful army in the world at this time. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, "We went into the Aramean camp, and no one was there, not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were." The gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. The king got up in the night and said to his officers, "I will tell you what the Arameans have done to us." Already he's doubting. Can't believe that this could possibly be good news. Already he must be melancholy, immediately looking to the negative, right? What could be going wrong? They know we are starving, and so they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city. Always looking for the negative. Why can't I see God's hand? Why do I have to look for the negative in everything? One of his officers answered, "Have some men take 5 of the horses that they are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of all the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like all these Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find out what happened." So they selected 2 chariots and with their horses, and the king sent them after the Aramean army. He commanded the drivers, "Go and find out what has happened." They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. You see the same word? They fled headlong into the sea. Remember I read that? They fled headlong into the sea, and now they're fleeing headlong on their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. Then the people went out and plundered the camp of the Arameans. So a seah of finest flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said. Now the king had put the officer on whose arm he leaned in charge of the gate. What was it? What did Elisha say about this guy? You're not going to be enjoying any of it. And the people trampled him in the gateway, and he died, just as the man of God had foretold when the king came down to his house. It happened as the man of God had said to the king, "About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer had said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" spreading doubt, right? The man of God had replied, "You will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it." And that's exactly what happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gateway and he died. They're making a really, really big point about unbelief. You see, this story is as much about what happens when you believe, what happens when you do not believe, what happens when you try to look for God. Let's just think positive. What could God do? He had no imagination for that, but he had immediate imagination of what could not happen. Even if the floodgates were open, it still couldn't happen. It was the ultimate of disbelief. So this story is proclaiming the importance, the significance, what will happen, what are the possibilities of God showing up and acting and changing your life if you trust. And what are your odds if you do not trust? This man, so it ends the story with, it happened just like he said. He was trampled to death. He never enjoyed the fruit. It was there, the same, it was available, but he disbelieved. And he was denied this wonderful, wonderful gift out of disbelief. So many times you will see people walk away from your invitation to believe, their invitation to be healed, because they have to believe. All we can do is present who God is. Your stories, these stories, are going to uplift you, are going to uplift them. What gives us reason to believe? Very, very exciting. I'm going to share with you, there's a part 2, because this is so worth remembering. I'm going to tell you more stories next week of when God shows up in completely impossible situations. Amen?